What you are looking at is a Five Nights at Freddy's challenge that makes even 5020 look like an absolute cakewalk. And as a victor of 5020 myself, I would certainly know. So then, what exactly makes this challenge so hard? And what is it? And perhaps most importantly, why would I do this to myself? Well, let me tell you the story of how I beat my first major FNAF challenge. Okay, so I've been a FNAF fan for a while now, but I never really touched any FNAF fan games, except for the Glitched Attraction because it is goated. For the longest time, I always imagined them as these RNG fests with layered PNGs and terribly thought out gameplay, and I never really was all that interested in them. That was sort of my impression at the time. I had no idea how high quality and how crazy some of these games could get, especially when it comes to difficulty. Now, if you couldn't tell by my videos, I'm no stranger to hard challenges. And if I'd only known the truth about some of these FNAF fan games, I probably would have been interested in them a lot sooner. And then one day, that truth was shown to me. I randomly got recommended this video by the Bones5 and figured, it might be interesting. What I didn't know is that it would change the next year or so of my life instantly. I found this challenge to be really interesting. What stood out to me about it was that it was so simple. All you had to do was aim at the animatronic's eyes. Since I have years of experience playing FPS games, I knew I probably had the aim to pull off this challenge myself. And since its simplicity meant that I wouldn't have to get a freaking PhD in how the game works in order to have a chance, I knew that if there was any stupidly hard FNAF challenge I could beat, it was this one. And so I decided to give it a try. So what exactly are you looking at here? This is a challenge called RACAC All Challenges, which is essentially an insanely hyper-buffed and slightly reworked version of the main night of Five Nights at Candy's 3. You see, Five Nights at Candy's is one of the most iconic FNAF fan game series of all time. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say it may be the most iconic FNAF fan game series of all time. It sure was to me back in the day. But the problem with the Five Nights at Candy's games were the gameplay. Emil Mako wanted to try to force the player base to come up with new strategies for his games to make them distinct from the regular old Five Nights at Freddy's games. And he was successful. But because the gameplay type was so new, there were some major problems with it. In Five Nights at Candy's 1, you could abuse the way doors worked and essentially leave them closed for the entire night. In Five Nights at Candy's 2, you could just spam phones and never had to leave the camera system. And in Five Nights at Candy's 3, the animatronics were extremely slow and unthreatening once you knew how to deal with them. And all of that is fine. After all, the gameplay of the first FNAF game didn't exactly age well either, and people were more interested in the horror and story of these games anyways. But lately, people have really started to pick up on the potential of FNAF challenges, and so a group of people decided to make Five Nights at Candy's But Better, a remake of all the Five Nights at Candy's games with a complete rework to their gameplay. These remakes have reworked all of the games to not only remove the issues with their gameplay, but also make them several times harder. Every single one of them has at least one challenge that's at least skill-wise harder than 5020 and Post Shift 2's max modes, according to the max mode list's main list. For this video, we will be focusing on the remake of Five Nights at Candy's 3, creatively named Five Nights at Candy's 3 Custom Night. The main game mode for this game features you surviving against two monster animatronics, creatively named Monster Rat and Monster Cat, which I will just shorten to Rat and Cat. Rat works like how he does in the base Five Nights at Candy's 3. He will appear in either your left door, middle wardrobe, or right closet. You can temporarily send him away by shining your flashlight on him, but he will soon come back with less and less patience every time, and eventually he'll make it into your room for the main gameplay of Five Nights at Candy's 3, the attack sequences. Rat will fully enter your room, and the only way to stop him at this point is to shine your flashlight into his eyes. Of course, Rat won't just let you do this for free, he will try to dodge and weave around to avoid your flashlight. If you fail to have your flashlight on him for too long, or too often, Remy will force you to cook ratatouille in his restaurant for all eternity. The attack sequence can take place in one of three locations depending on which entrance Rat entered from. We'll talk more about the differences in the three locations later on, as, trust me, the difficulty can vary very wildly depending on which location the attack sequence takes place in. But for now, let's talk about the bedside sequences. Once you have sufficiently damaged Rat's retinas, he will usually hide under your bed. This was actually a pretty big headache for me when I was first learning this game, because the mod just kinda assumes you played the original Five Nights at Candy's 3, and so it has one of the worst tutorials I have ever seen. Take a look at this. Monster Rat works the same way they did in FNAC 3. Shine your light on the doors, shine your light on his face, and if he enters your room, then lure him out from under your bed. Like, what does that even mean? Well, as it turns out, when Rat goes under the bed, you're supposed to check to see which side he's on, and then lure him out by looking the opposite way until you hear a faint audio cue. Then, you can turn back around and give his pupils one last dose of overstimulation, and he will leave. I shit you not. It took me like 2 hours to get that sequence down, even with a video, because of so many things I just didn't realize. For one, I kept getting which side I'm supposed to look at confused. And at first, I thought I was just being really stupid, but as it turns out, I was just completely misunderstanding what our character was actually doing. You see, I thought our character was just fully getting off the bed and turning around to look underneath it. And as such, my left and right would be flipped. But as it turns out, your character just kind of hangs their head off the edge to look underneath it. And as such, left and right were unchanged. This little misunderstanding cost me hours of my life, and I only figured out all of that after beating every max mode in that version of the game months after I started it. Fantastic. Until then, I kind of just only checked the left side and burned into my memory what to do if I saw him or not. On top of that, I had no idea there was an audio cue for Rat being lured out. I just kept kind of trying to time it, and I was always way too early since Rat takes much longer to be lured out than you might expect. But once I figured out the audio cue and got the luring sequence down, I was pretty much done learning Rat. So now it's time to talk about Cat. In base Five Nights at Candy's 3, Cat would just kind of show up breathing loudly down your neck every now and then, and all you had to do was flash your light at him until he disappeared. But in Five Nights at Candy's But Better, Cat got fully reworked and now has full attack sequences like Rat does, but with a little twist. When Cat enters your room, rather than instantly going into the attack sequence, he will instead rush under your bed and an ambient audio cue will play. Now you have to lure him out and do the bedside sequence first, and then the attack sequence comes. And then he leaves. There are some noticeable differences between the two during attack sequences, but we'll get more into that later. Just like Rat, you can stall Cat at the doors with your flashlight, but he will eventually get in. I should also mention that if Rat ever enters your room when Cat is under your bed, Rat will instantly jumpscare you on the spot. So you absolutely need to use the stalling mechanic to make sure they alternate their attacks properly. And that is all the animatronics for the base version of the challenge creatively named Rat and Cat. I know, the naming convention for this game is peak creativity. Now before I get into the strategy for the night, I want to talk about the shadow challenges. You see, Rat and Cat on their own are actually not that easy, and even without any challenges on, these two at their highest difficulty are already considered to be harder than challenges like Aggressive Nightmare from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, and even approach the difficulty of FNAF 4's 420 mode. Again, according to the max mode list. However, Rat and Cat's difficulty really shines when you turn on all the optional challenges, which makes it go from easier than FNAF 4's 420 to easily harder than 5020. And it doesn't even stop there, but more on that later. I'm bringing up the shadow challenges specifically because they just affect the cycle of the night too much, and I feel it would be kind of a waste of time to talk about one strategy, only to immediately turn around and talk about a different strategy for the rest of the video. The Shadow Rat and Shadow Cat challenges turn Rat and Cat into these weird shadow versions that kind of look like they're wearing some, freaky suits, and give them jump scares that I personally consider to be way lamer than their normal versions. Oh yeah, and they completely change the cycle of the night or whatever. The main difference comes from the Shadow Cat challenge. Now, Shadow Cat decided that he wants to be insanely clingy and will literally never leave your room. But wait a minute, remember how I said that Rat will instantly jump scare you if he enters while Cat is under the bed? Well, that rule has been modified a bit. Now, Rat will instantly jump scare you if he enters while Cat is ready to be lured out from under the bed, which can be determined by the ambient audio cue getting much louder. Shadow Cat also has two attack phases, one short one and one long one. And for some reason, Rat can still enter the room and instantly kill you during the first Cat attack phase, but not the second one. In general, Shadow Cat is much more difficult at high difficulties than Shadow Rat is. Shadow Rat is a lot more about speed. This guy will twitch so much that trying to follow him will genuinely feel like you're trying to follow the limbo keys. Except, you need to actually aim at the keys. You might be wondering why Shadow Rat is easier than Shadow Cat if he twitches so much more. There are three main reasons for this. The first is that Rat will always dodge after a constant 16 frames of your mouse being on his hitbox, making it easy to sort of predict when he's about to move, and thus you'll end up losing less health. Health is what I referred to progress on their jumpscare timer as, since if you run out of it, you just die. Any time spent with your mouse not on their hitbox will decrease your health rapidly, and any time with your mouse on their hitbox will increase your health slowly. But while the animatronics are moving, it doesn't matter where your mouse is. Your health won't go up or down while they're moving. The second reason is that Cat's starting pose for each of his attacks is always his middle pose, whereas Cat's starting pose is pretty much random for his second attack, which is the most dangerous one. Also, Rat's first movement takes much longer, allowing us to regenerate some free health at the start of his attack. So, long story short, we usually start Rat's attack with much more health and start Cat's attacks with much less health. Oh yeah, and Cat also has something called 8-frame movements, which are super RNG, and I'll talk more about them later. Now, Shadow Rat actually does have one more minor change that doesn't really affect you after a few dozen attempts, but it will really trip up new players at first. After luring Rat out from under the bed, the window to flash him away is stupidly small. Unless you're super familiar with the audio cue and are able to react to it early, it's really hard to be able to look all the way to the other side of the room in order to flash Rat in time. You can make it slightly easier by turning the camera as far towards the middle as possible while still having your cursor far enough to the side of the room for it to still count as you looking away from him. I usually use this corner of the room as a marker for how far left I need to have my mouse in order for me to be considered looking left, and this corner bedpost as a marker for how right my mouse needs to be in order for me to be considered looking to the right. Okay, so now we're ready to talk about the cycle of the night. At the start of the night, the very first thing we need to do is start the tape recording. While the tape recorder is playing, the night passes twice as fast, so it's always a good idea to keep it playing for as long as possible. After pressing play on the tape player, immediately look under the bed and check the left side to see if Cat is there. You don't need to check both sides, since if we see that Cat is not on the left side, we know he can only be on the right. If you see Cat, turn to the left until you hear Rat knocking at the door. If you don't see Cat, turn to the right. Once you hear the knocking, quickly move over all 3 of Rat's spawns in order to flash and stall him for the entirety of the first Cat attack. We need to move quickly here, or we could run out of time that Rat is stalled before getting Cat to his second phase, resulting in an instant death. After flashing Rat, we need to start looking to the opposite side of where Cat is under the bed. If we're not fast enough, Cat will come out and politely ask for the lasagna. Once you hear the creaking of the bed, flash Cat and do both of his attacks. Once you're done with that, Rat should be really close to attacking by now. It is very important to make sure you watch where your mouse is positioned during this time, as stalling Rat here would cause him to take too long, and we would find ourselves in a situation later on where Rat and Cat would attack at the same time, which again results in an instant death. Once Rat enters the room, simply do his attack. Once Rat's attack is done, rewind the tape player and do his bedside sequence. Then you just need to repeat for roughly 4.5 minutes and you will have completed Shadow Rat and Shadow Cat. Now let's add some more of those optional challenges. Our next challenge is Classic Cat. Classic Cat actually adds a whole nother animatronic to the night, and it's actually the original monster cat from Five Nights at Freddy's 3. So now there's 2 cats we need to deal with. Classic Cat is by far the least threatening animatronic in the game though, and in my opinion is also the easiest challenge to add. Classic Cat will always be at one of the far sides of your bed, and will slowly move towards you when you're not looking at him. To get rid of him, all you need to do is shine your light at him until he completely disappears. In base Five Nights at Freddy's 3, this would actually cause him to disappear for a while. But in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 But Better, he just immediately switches sides. We can actually use this to our advantage to keep Classic Cat where we want him. The basic idea is to always keep Classic Cat on the same side as whatever animatronic we're currently dealing with, so that we're always looking at him and he can't progress as fast. Here's what that looks like in a cycle. At the start of the night, during the short period while waiting for Cat to come out from under the bed, start by looking on the same side that Cat is on, and check to see if Classic Cat is there. If he is, flash him away. Then flick to the other side to lure out Cat, again making sure to hover over all 3 of Rat's spawns in order to stall him. Then do Cat's attack. You'll notice that Classic Cat is on the opposite side of Shadow Cat during the first Cat attack, but when Cat switches to the other side, or middle for the second, much longer attack, you'll either be looking in the middle, where he doesn't progress much, or at him, where he won't progress at all. After doing Cat's full attack, check to see if Rat is about to attack in the same place. But again, make sure not to stall him, or you'll completely ruin the cycle of the night and be dead in less than 30 seconds. If Rat is on the same side that Classic Cat is, keep him there. If not, fully flash him away. I should also mention that even when keeping Classic Cat on the same side, it's helpful to flash him as much as you can without making him switch sides. It just helps keep his kill timer down for the attack sequences. Now for the bed phases. After repelling Rat's attack and rewinding the tape player, remember where Classic Cat was where you last left him. If he's on the same side as Rat under the bed, just do the bed phase like normal. But if Classic Cat is on the other side, flash him away while waiting for Rat to come out from under the bed. When Rat and Cat are both under the bed, they will always be on opposite sides. So if Rat was on the left side, Cat will be on the right. Since we want Classic Cat to be on the side of Shadow Cat's second attack, we actually want to keep him on the same side as Rat here no matter what. It does help to get a couple quick shines in to reset his progress a little though. Now all you have to do is repeat 4 or so times, and you will have beaten the night. Classic Cat was the last challenge that altered the cycle of the night. Our last 2 challenges simply make the existing cycle much stricter and require more consistency. Up first, we have Hard Cassette. Normally, having the tape player playing is a reward that makes the night go faster, but with Hard Cassette on, now it's a requirement. With Hard Cassette on, if you don't have the tape player on for too long, your screen will slowly turn purple and you'll fall asleep and lose the night. But to be honest, with a good cycle, you'll never go long enough without the tape player playing for that to be a problem. The much more significant part of this challenge is that the game will no longer reward you for having it playing anymore. The night doesn't speed up while it's playing. So now you have to deal with a full 8-minute long night. I find it funny how this challenge just goes full strict parent mode and completely ditches the positive reinforcement thing it had earlier and just straight up punishes you for doing bad now instead of rewarding for doing good. Okay, now it's time to talk about one of the most controversial challenges in the entire Max Mode community, Laser Pointer. Okay, sorry, no montage here because Laser Pointer has actually been nerfed. More on that in a bit. Normally your flashlight has a very large radius that allows you to see most of the room, and as such you can easily see where the animatronics dodge to. Well, this challenge decided that seeing is overrated, and now you get a tiny freaking circle to see the animatronic movements. With such a small circle, it's really difficult to see where the animatronics move to, especially when they twitch. You need to have insane reaction time and mouse speed to have a chance at surviving an attack, especially attacks that happen on the middle and right. When animatronics attack from the left side, they are quite far away, and their movements actually aren't that far away from each other when talking in screen space, sort of like how a parallax effect works. Because of this, even with laser pointer, you can still just barely see which position they end up after a movement. This is not the case for middle and right sides, however. The movements on those sides are more than far enough away from each other to be in complete darkness every single movement. It's so bad that the strategy to beat these attacks is to literally predict when they will move, and even guess where they will move, which we call prediction movement. On every version of Rat and Cat All challenges, it's super important to get really good at prediction movement. Here's how it works. Rat will always move roughly 16 frames after you start flashing him. I usually like to always move to the next location right on the 16th frame to give me as much movement and reaction time as possible. Now, we don't have any way of knowing where Rat will move to next, but I always like to assume that he will move as down left as possible. If I'm right, I gain a ton of health to his progress bar. And if I'm wrong, I just need to react as fast as possible and switch to the other location, which I would need to do anyways. So then what about the twitches? How do you deal with those? The answer is as simple as it gets, with just sheer speed. You may look like a chihuahua on crack when Rat starts twitching like crazy, but trust me, it's the most reliable way to deal with tons of twitching. And it feels super good when you survive an attack where Rat is twitching so much that it looks like he's having a seizure. So that is the basic idea of how to deal with a Rat with laser pointer. But what about Cat? Cat's movement is much less reliable and much less predictable than Rat is. Rat is all about prediction and speed, but Cat is all about reaction. You see, Cat doesn't always move after 16 frames of being flashed. Instead, he can move after either 0, 8, 16, or 24 frames of being flashed. So we can't just predict when he's going to move, or we might go too early or too late, which was actually a huge source of deaths for me during this challenge. Also, 8-frame movements are insanely bullshit. You still have to deal with the movement and reaction time of dealing with one of his movements, but you only get 8 frames where his health bar actually goes up. So if you get a ton of 8-frame movements, you kind of just get bad RNG and it's really difficult to survive. 0-frame movements are different because they don't actually decrease your health, but 8-frame movements do. In general, for all these reasons, Cat's movements take much longer to snap to. But he always moves less than Rat does. Snapping to the correct starting position is super important, as most of the time my Cat attack sequences failed, it was almost always to having a bad start. You can kind of equate this to starting a boss fight with less health compared to having more health. I'm not gonna lie, with laser pointer on, these guys' attacks are actually really hard to survive. And it's really easy to see why even the nerfed laser pointer is ranked over 50 spots higher on the main list than 5020. Some of the max mode community do say that the nerfed laser pointer doesn't add that much difficulty, but I completely disagree. In my opinion, laser pointer, even after the nerf, is probably the hardest challenge in Rat and Cat, maybe with the exception of the Shadow Cat challenge. Anyways, it took me about 4 days of build-up and grinding, but I was eventually able to beat Rat and Cat All challenges, my first max mode in the top 150.
Holy shit! Hee. Oh my god.
Hey Ingots, why is there so much video left? Wasn't that the hardest version of Rat and Cat on the main list? Oh no, that's not the hardest version of Rat and Cat on the main list. That's the hardest version of Rat and Cat on the main list. OG laser pointer. Oh boy, now we're getting into the big leagues, aren't we? If you're not familiar with the original version of laser pointer, it's kind of like hydrogen bomb versus coughing baby when it comes to difficulty. I'm not even joking when I say that the difference in difficulty between just Rat on his easiest difficulty with no challenges active, and Rat and Cat on their hardest difficulty with all challenges active is still not as big of a difficulty gap as Rat and Cat All challenges and Rat and Cat All challenges with OG laser pointer. So what the hell makes this so damn hard then? Well, the nerfed laser pointer actually doesn't change the hitboxes of Rat and Cat. It's just a visual change. But originally, the laser pointer shrank the hitboxes to roughly half their size. This made aim so much more important, and just the slightest increase in travel time made managing your health that much more difficult. However, in version 3.1.3, the laser pointer was nerfed to be just a visual change. And this nerf absolutely nuked the difficulty of Rat and Cat All challenges. But by just typing torture on our keyboard at the main menu, we can bring this challenge back to its former glory. So how do we compensate with this new insane jump in difficulty? Bigger than any difficulty jump so far. Well, the truth is, there isn't really anything left up our sleeve. The only way to beat OG laser pointer is to kind of just be good at the game. This is a fight of true skill, patience, and determination. Now, I was definitely determined enough to beat this challenge, and the skill would just come with time. But what about patience? I'm gonna be honest, I was starting to run low pretty quickly. I had used up a lot of my patience for hard challenges this year on Sonic Wave already, and after about 3 days of grinding and making only slow progress, I was starting to go insane. I did have a slight bit of alleviation in this when I beat this challenge without hard cassette on. The problem is that adding hard cassette to OG Laser Pointer really makes a big difference, and I still had a long way to go. Now, I have the absolute silliest ways of coping with ridiculous amounts of video game deaths. For Rat and Cat, my nerd ass decided to calculate the consistency I needed to beat Rat and Cat within a reasonable amount of time, and compared it to my current consistency. What I found was that if I could manage to survive 75% of rat attacks and 65% of cat attacks, I would be able to beat the challenge within about 600 attempts, which sounds like a lot, but I wasn't kidding when I said this challenge is hard. It was more than reasonable. The problem was that at the time of me measuring that, which was about 3 days into the grind, I only had about a 65% rat survival rate and a 58% cat survival rate. Now, at first that might not seem that far off, but that difference in accuracy drags my chances of winning on any given attempt down from about 1 in 600 to about 1 in 6,000, which was definitely a bit too much for me. That might sound super demotivating, but if you think about it from an improvement perspective, I actually found it to be super inspiring. By only increasing my cat survival rate by 7% and my rat survival rate by 10%, I could increase my chances of winning tenfold, and so I continued to keep track of my survival rate. I ended up grinding for about 2 more days, and by the end of the second day, my numbers had improved dramatically. Not only did I manage to reach the target 65% cat accuracy, but I actually managed to increase my rat accuracy all the way to 83%. I knew I was starting to get really close, since I had 3 5 AM runs that day, of which the last had an absolute ton of right side cat attacks, so it's not like I was just getting lucky. With consistency like that, it wasn't really a matter of improvement anymore. It was just a matter of time. And on the very next day, the time had come.
Holy shit!
When I first started FNAC But Better, I didn't really think I would be able to do OG Laser Pointer, but I managed to prove myself wrong, and I had a lot of fun doing it. To this day, I still consider Rat and Cat All Challenges with OG Laser Pointer to be the most fun max mode I have ever beaten, and it really made me want to try out some more max modes. Maybe one day I'd even beat something crazy hard like Hopeless Pursuit, Ultimatum, or even something way harder. But before even thinking about that, I'd need to get a lot more max modes under my belt. I'd need to slowly improve my skill one challenge at a time. I'd need to beat challenges that expand my skill set, challenges that are very different from one another. You see, Rat and Cat almost perfectly matches my existing skill set, so it just marks a starting point for me at my best. But although we're not done with FNAC 3 just yet, if I ever wanted to beat something as hard as a top 1, I'm gonna need to improve skills that I'm currently very bad at. And so I selected some challenges that not only I thought would be fun to beat, but also could help me build the skills I would need to beat some really hard challenges. I made a list out of them and put them in the order that I think would be the most beneficial for me to beat them in. For the past few months, I have been checking challenges off this list as much as I could. I call this list the ladder. Hey Ingots, I'm confused. You said we aren't done with Five Nights at Kenny's 3 yet, right? Right. But wasn't Brat and Cat with OG Laser Pointer the hardest Five Nights at Kenny's 3 challenge, at least on the main list? Oh, silly viewer. That wasn't the hardest FNAC 3 challenge on the main list. That's the hardest FNAC 3 challenge on the main list.